Number 6. Skymaster down. While on a remote airfield just outside of Anchorage, Alaska, Master Sergeant Robert Espy with the U.S. Air Force had to say goodbye to his wife Joyce and their 2-year-old son on January 26, 1950. Joyce was 7 months pregnant at the time, which only made leaving Robert that much worse. And she was originally from India, so she was already having a hard time with the Alaskan winter. On the flight were Joyce, her son, and 42 other U.S. servicemen heading on their way to Great Falls, Montana. From there, she planned to travel to Rifle, Colorado, where she had close friends and intended to give birth to her second child. The aircraft she was on, a Douglas C-54D Skymaster, was a transport carrier that had been used in World War II. The plane had an 8-person crew and had room for an additional 50 passengers, and luckily, everyone on board was fitted with a parachute in case of an emergency. Joyce and her son were seated next to Sergeant Roy Jones, a close friend of Robert's from the base who'd reached the end of his service and was headed home to be discharged. The flight seemed to be going well, but around 2 hours after takeoff, the plane's radio operator checked in with air traffic control over a settlement called Snag along the Yukon's White River, which was the last time anyone heard from the Skymaster. At some point after passing over Snag, the aircraft vanished, and no trace of it has ever been found despite numerous search efforts to locate it. After finding out about the plane's disappearance, Robert Espy reportedly said, "I've gone through all the hysterics and cried myself silly. I'm just stunned." While it's bizarre for an aircraft to completely vanish without a trace, it's not all that uncommon. Stories like this have cropped up every couple of years since we've been able to make international flights. But in 2018, a glimmer of hope was discovered by a man named Andrew Gregg, which seemed to offer a clue into the mystery surrounding the missing Douglas C-54D Skymaster. As Andrew was visiting retired archaeologist Greg Hare in Whitehorse, Canada, he noticed something peculiar on one of the man's shelves in his storeroom at Yukon Archaeology. The object, which was green, mangled, and covered in rust, appeared to be a salvaged chunk of burnt airplane gear. Andrew was told by the man that the artifact likely fell from a drop tank, an auxiliary fuel container that's typically used on long military flights. Hare and one of his colleagues, Ty Hefner, found the piece of plane gear and originally thought it was part of the U.S. military plane that disappeared in 1950 with 44 passengers on board. And while this artifact hasn't been proven to come from the missing Skymaster, it did spark Andrew's interest in the mystery, and he's been obsessed with it ever since. Andrew is a filmmaker who since gathered footage in the Yukon to use in his new documentary about the plane called Skymaster Down. This disappearance remains one of Canada's worst aviation disaster in the country's history, and over 70 years later, it's still a mystery that nobody's been able to solve. There have been a total of 510 plane crashes over the Yukon, and out of those wrecks, only 4 planes have yet to be recovered, one being the Skymaster from 1950. According to Andrew, this plane just refuses to turn up. While completing rescue missions for the supposed downed aircraft, 3 other planes crashed in the Yukon. One such aircraft, a Douglas C-47D, was found near Haines Junction, lending an eerie peek into the past. It crashed on February 7, 1950, while searching for the Skymaster. All 10 people on board remarkably survived the wreck and only sustained minor injuries, but the main rescue mission was halted while the crew from the C-47D were saved. It still sits in a remote and barren field surrounded by rocky mountains, but it doesn't help solve the mystery of the missing plane. All 44 passengers on board the lost flight have since been presumed dead, but Andrew's documentary on the incident, which first aired in January of 2022, breathes new life into the search for the Skymaster. Hopefully, in the near future, the wreckage will be found since, after all, everything turns up eventually. Number 5. Sahara Desert Plane Crash. A parachute and bones were discovered near an eerily preserved plane that crashed in the Sahara Desert over 80 years ago. The wreckage of the P-40 Kitty Hawk was found by accident in 2012. The body, which is believed to belong to Airman Dennis Copping, was located near the site on some rocks just 3 miles from where the aircraft crash-landed in 1942. Close to the man's remains were a keychain fob with the number 61 engraved onto it. along with a metal button dated from the year 1939. According to Copping's relatives, the Ministry of Defense told him that the bones didn't belong to the lost airman. But apparently the skeleton was never recovered for analysis, meaning that there's a chance it could be that of Flight Sergeant Copping. Back in 2012, one of the man's living relatives, William Pryor Bennett, urged for DNA tests to be carried out on the remains. 62-year-old Pryor Bennett told the Daily Mail that he was utterly appalled by the way the matter was handled. To this day, it doesn't seem like any tests have been done to the bones, and they're still supposedly lying in the desert. Copping had been flying between two British military bases in Egypt amidst the North Africa campaign during World War II when he vanished along with his plane. When the aircraft was discovered in 2012, there were clear signs that Copping had initially survived the crash, and there was a makeshift shelter that he'd created using his parachute on the outside of the plane. But unfortunately, the bones found near the wreck site tell the end of the story, showing evidence that the man died while attempting to walk out of the desert. Allegedly, 12 of the man's bones were found by a team of Italian historians. Independent forensic anatomist Dr. Lawrence Gary studied the images of the bones and confirmed that they belonged to a human without a doubt. However, the Ministry of Defense stated that because there was no military clothing found near the bones, they had no reason to believe the skeleton belonged to Copping. The MOD's resources are limited to investigate such a discovery found in a remote part of the Sahara Desert, but reportedly they're still in contact with the lost airman's family as well as the embassy in Cairo. Unfortunately, until more evidence is revealed that proves the bones belong to Copping, there likely won't be any further investigation into the matter. For now, the P-40 Kitty Hawk is in the Egyptian government's possession, who's since given the aircraft a hideous makeover. The plane was painted yellow and brown and was given shark teeth as part of a restoration project. It's now on display at the El Alamein Military Museum in Marina, Egypt. Number 4. The Passenger from Hell. Have you ever sat next to someone on the plane that made the entire flight miserable? Well, this exact scenario occurred on a flight from San Juan, Puerto Rico that was heading to John F. Kennedy Airport in New York in November of 2015. A passenger on American Airlines Flight 937 caught the attention of several other passengers when he drunkenly attempted to take off his pants and tried to smoke multiple cigarettes in the cabin. The 4-hour flight was delayed on the tarmac for an hour and a half before it managed to get into the air, and by that time, passengers noticed that the man had already downed the majority of a bottle of Dewar's Scotch. An individual who was only identified as Otto explained to the Gothamist that the man looked at him and said, "I'm just looking for my wife," and when he was told he didn't know where the woman was, he replied, "You better not know where she is." After this interaction, the man decided to unbuckle his pants and get a bit more comfortable. But before he managed to strip down, another passenger called a flight attendant and reported his indecent behavior. Then, just as a stewardess was arriving, he tried to light up a cigarette. Luckily though, the flight attendant didn't allow him to do so and took the man's cigarettes away from him. It should have been over after that, but the passenger continued to cause issues, even pulling out a second pack of cigarettes, prompting the man to sit next to him to yell in Spanish, "Listen buddy, you can't smoke cigarettes on a plane." Other passengers on the flight pleaded with the attendants to arrest or at least restrain the drunk flyer, but there wasn't any air marshal on board, and the crew members didn't want to hold him in case he became violent. And so, they basically babysat him instead until they arrived at their destination. Over the course of the flight, the man pulled his pants down to his ankles and refused to cover himself with a blanket. While nobody was injured during the incident, everyone was made to feel uncomfortable by this inappropriate behavior. When the plane landed at JFK, law enforcement met the flight due to the disruptive passenger. However, there weren't any arrests made according to the Port Authority. The story just goes to show that apparently you can get away with a lot more on an aircraft than most people realize. Number 3. Strange objects overhead. Over Arizona in 2018, 2 different airline pilots reported seeing UFOs flying above their planes, according to CBS Denver. The Federal Aviation Administration also released audio of the radio broadcasts from the bizarre incident. Radio logs proved that a pilot operating an American Airlines flight and another in control of a Phoenix Air Learjet saw the same object flying in complete opposite direction of their planes on February 24th. The Phoenix Air pilot was the first to spot the UFO at around 3:30 p.m., at which point he called down to the FAA and asked, Was anybody above us that passed us like 30 seconds ago? To the pilot's surprise, the answer he received was negative. Then, less than a minute later, the FAA received a second report of the mysterious object from American Airlines Flight 1095. The pilot claimed that something passed over them, but he couldn't identify what it was. He added that the UFO must have been at least 2,000 or 3,000 feet above the plane. Apparently, the object had a big reflection, and the pilots doubted that it could have been a weather balloon. And while it's not certain whether or not the mysterious craft had extraterrestrial origins, there hasn't been any evidence to prove otherwise. So what do you think they really saw in the sky that day? Aliens or something else? Number 2. Danger mid-flight. In early 2022, on a flight bound from Los Angeles, California to Washington, D.C., an unruly male passenger attempted to open the door of the plane, causing the aircraft to divert to Kansas City, Missouri. According to a spokesperson for the Association of Professional Flight Attendants, the reckless man tried to open the forward passenger door until a stewardess used a coffee pot to subdue him. The man also allegedly attempted to rush the cockpit, but he failed. One person on the flight tweeted about the ordeal, saying it felt like the plane was free-falling and many feared the worst because people weren't fully aware of what was unfolding. That same individual described the unruly passenger as a middle-aged man. Apparently, during the man's delusional attempts to open a cabin door in the aircraft, a flight attendant struck him multiple times with a coffee pot, while other passengers restrained him for everyone else's safety. American Airlines confirmed after the incident that the flight was diverted due to the man's erratic behavior. But despite the circumstances, the plane landed safely at the Kansas City International Airport, where it was met by law enforcement. In what seemed to be a matter of national security, the FBI got involved. However, the agency reported after the fact that the unruly individual was taken into custody. Unfortunately, the suspect's name was never released to the public, so it's unclear what repercussions he faced in the aftermath of his actions. Number 1. Crazy Cat Lady. In 2015, on a flight headed from Las Vegas to Frankfurt, Germany, a crazy cat lady caused such a commotion that the plane had to be escorted to Denver by a pair of fighter jets. The woman supposedly became upset after the plane's crew put her cat in a bathroom. Apparently, she'd entered the aircraft with the animal stored in her purse, not in a proper pet carrier, so the only thing the crew could think to do was to put the cat in the lavatory. According to passenger Deshenka Giraldo, the woman was so distraught that she even claimed to be part of the mafia and said she could bring the plane down if that's what she needed to do in order to see her cat. While it's unclear if she really was part of the mafia or if she was just desperate to see her fur baby, her actions were completely uncalled for. Fritz Peterson, another man who happened to be on the flight, told CBS Local that the lady wasn't at all happy with the plane's crew for putting her cat in the lavatory because after that, everything went wrong. The woman began to lash out at anyone who stood against her, even punching a flight attendant in the face. After she made threats to down the aircraft, the pilot made a call and alerted authorities to the situation unfolding on board. This resulted in 2 F-16 fighter jets being sent from Buckley Air Force Base to escort the plane to safety in Denver. After arriving, the unruly woman was questioned about her erratic behavior. In the end, the FBI got involved but announced a while later that the passenger wasn't facing any charges for her threats and actions, citing the whole ordeal as a misunderstanding. If you were a flight attendant, would you rather deal with an unruly passenger that seems to have no boundaries and thinks they can do whatever they want, or be on a 12-hour flight where one child screams the entire time? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.